What we're going to be doing now is we're going to be taking some of the information that we've learned over the last few weeks and we're going to apply them so that we can make some pretty cool things using CSS transforms and animations and all the things that we've been covering. So we're going to be creating a card flip. So you can see that here is a picture and I have some text on it, and when I hover over, it spins around and then I see an alternate image with alternate text. And you could really use this for anything, right? It could be pictures, it could be text-based content, you could even set up a form this way, you could have all sorts of things. My animation is triggered by a hover behavior, and so that's what we're going to be covering here. So I'm going to walk you through how I created something like this. Here is my starting file. So I have an HTML5 file and I have an aside tag with a class of card. I have a div with a class of content, and inside of that I have a div with a class of front, which has my Discover Paradise text, and I have a div with a class of back, which has my Get Out There text. And I just have some formatting on the body tag of my HTML. So I'm going to quickly just go ahead and make some CSS rules to kind of get everything positioned and aligned and where I want it to be on the page. So I'm going to start off by making a rule for my card element, and I'm going to be using position absolute, and I'm going to go ahead and set the top and left values to 50%, and I'm going to set the width and the height to 300 pixels. So if I save now and we go into the starting file and we refresh, you can see that this is what it looks like. So we just actually see the text. The pictures are actually going to be generated as background images on the associated divs. So we'll do that in just a minute. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a rule for my content div. And actually for right now, let me just put a border so that you can see where these things are. So if we put a border of solid red, you can see where the card element is. So for the content element, I'm going to set the width and the height to be 100%. That is going to allow these elements to fill the available space. And I'm going to add a box shadow rule. So my box shadow is going to be 0, 0, 12 pixels, and I'm going to be using RGBA, and we're just going to set this to like a 50% gray or black. We'll set our border radius to 8 pixels, and I'm going to go ahead and set a border on this element. So the border that I'm going to use is going to be solid, 3 pixels, and my color is going to be 6 CF. So if we save now and we refresh, you can now see the outline of my content element. That's the blue line. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a rule for the front and the back elements. And what we want to do here is set our position to absolute. Width and height are going to be 100%. Text color is white. Text align is center. I'm using a font size of 34 pixels. And I'm going to set the border radius on these to be 5. And then we're just going to set some unique styles for the front and the back. And actually I just realized I wrote font instead of front, so let me just change that right away. And for the front, we're going to set the background, and we'll go ahead and specify the URL. So I have a couple of images, and my images are already sized the size that I want them to be. One is of the turtle, and these are 300 by 300 pixels, and then the other one is going to be of the dolphins. And for the front, I'm going to set my line height to 100 pixels. And this is just going to push the text down a little bit from the top of the element. And then for the back, we're going to have similar rules. So we'll go ahead and call in our background image. And for this one, I'm going to be using my back.png. And on this element, we're going to set our line height to 460 pixels, and that should be it. So if I save this and we refresh, you can now see the back element, that is the dolphin element. So this one is now showing up. The reason that we're not seeing the front element is because the back one comes second, and these are both positioned absolute. So currently they're sitting right on top of each other. If I don't have this rule of position absolute and we refresh, then you're going to see both of the elements, and you can see that the turtle picture is going to appear first and then the dolphin one's going to appear second. But we want these to be right on top of each other, so we're going to use position of absolute. And I think just to make sure that I don't have any problems, I'm going to make the no repeat value on both of the backgrounds on these. All right, so this is our basic CSS that we have for the page. Obviously nothing is happening, there's no interactivity. This element is kind of pushed over here to the right, so I'm going to actually go back to my card element, and I'm just going to use a negative margin, and I'm going to set the margin to be negative 150 pixels, and this is just going to pull this up and over to the left, and therefore these items are going to be centered. The reason I'm using 150 is because my card elements and images are 300 pixels, so it's actually sizing these elements by the upper left hand corner. So if I pull this to the left and up by 150 pixels, then I get a true center positioning of these elements. All right, so now let's add the fun part to this. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to add some animation to this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a rule for the content, but I want it to be triggered when the card is hovered over. So my selector for this rule is going to be .card::hover space content. So this is going to get the content element when the card element is hovered over. And this kind of just acts as a catch-all. It's going to just make sure that anytime the user positions their mouse on top of the card, it's going to get everything. And what we're going to do here is we're going to use our transform, and we're going to rotate in the Y direction. So I'm going to use rotate Y, and I want it to rotate Y 180 degrees. So this is essentially going to flip the card around. We'll have the transition property be set to transform, and I'm going to have it happen in 2 seconds. So if we save this and if we refresh, when I position over this, you can see how it flips this element over, okay? And we no longer need that red outline, so let's just delete this border red that we put on the card element. Now, there's a couple things that are happening. You can see that the dolphin element is just simply spinning around, and when I hover away, you can see how it just snaps back to its original rotation on the Y element. And obviously we're never seeing the turtle element, we're just seeing the dolphin element, which I'm calling the back side of my card. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and we're going to specify that we want to apply a transition to the content element. So we already have these other rules on our content element, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a transition. And the reason that I want to do this is because I want to make sure that everything is working in conjunction with each other. So I'm going to say transform, and we're going to have this transform in 1 second. So if we save now, this is what it looked like before. If we refresh and we mouse over, you can now see that the card is transitioning back. Now it transitions back a little bit faster, so it takes 2 seconds to get to the flipped state, and then when I hover away, it happens in 1 second, and that's a result of us passing in this information. So this is flipping it back. So when we hover over content, it's transformed in 2 seconds and it's rotating 180 degrees, and we don't have to pass on the 180 degrees here because it's already been flipped essentially. And so then when we're at the regular state, it just is going to flip it back. So now the card is flipping on both the hover and the unhovered behavior. Now what we want to do is we want to make it flip and show the different images. So we want to show the front initially and then the back when we hover over. In order to do this, I'm going to add to the front back rule that we have right here. I'm going to add backface visibility, and we're going to set the backface visibility to hidden. Backface visibility is a property that relates to 3D transforms. And with 3D transforms, you can manage to rotate an element so you would think of it as having a front and a back. So we can flip this element around. Now with the backface visibility by itself, we don't see a change because I haven't actually told this element to be a 3D element yet. In order to have it be 3D, I'm going to go into my content rule right here, and we're going to add a rule for transform style, and we're going to set this to preserve 3D. So if we set this to preserve 3D and we refresh, now you can see that something is happening. There is something that looks a little bit different. We no longer are actually seeing the back side of the dolphin image and the dolphin text, the back div. We just see a blank div currently. So what we need to do is we need to tell the back image to actually be rotated by default. So I'm going to set a transform property on the back, and we're going to tell this to rotate Y, and I'm going to tell it to rotate 180 degrees. And by doing this, when I refresh, we now see the turtle image when we're looking at the page, and when I hover over, we now see the dolphin image, and when I hover away, it goes back to the turtle image. So now this flip is working in the way we wanted it to. So I needed to set the default transform property of back to be rotated 180 degrees. And then when we're hovering over the card, it's applying the transform rotate to essentially the front. It's applying to the entire content element. So it's actually flipping the turtle image to the back. And because we have the backface visibility set to hidden, we don't see the turtle image. And then when this is transformed, it's setting the back image to be transformed so it's facing us. And so we can actually see it. And so its backface is showing, so this is no longer going to be hidden. And so all of these things together allow us to, with just pure CSS, create this really cool animation where you can actually have something flip over when it's hovered on. And obviously the trigger could be lots of different things. Hover is just an easy one to do, but you can get really creative with this sort of behavior. So you can see that now we're using some of those CSS properties in principle and application, and we're getting some really awesome results.